So I probably don't need to really say much about his background. Probably many of you know it. He is the classic definition of a serial entrepreneur. Scott started his first company many years ago, Stingray, and sold it for $20 million. And then he went on to start his second company and sold it for 10 times more than that. And then a third company, ChannelAdvisor, which had its IPO in 2013 and was acquired last year by Commerce Hub. It was one of the top 10 triangle transactions of last year, valued at $635 million. And then, most excitingly of all, you started Get Spiffy nearly a decade ago, and it's grown at an amazing clip, and I believe 45 markets and 3,000 to 4,000 washes daily. And I got to experience it for myself, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And you raised $30 million in Series C last year, I believe, or maybe this year. Yep. So quite a roster of accomplishments that we can certainly learn from his experiences today. And I wanted to share with you how I first encountered Scott. And I don't know, Scott, if you know this, but it was a long time ago. It was nearly 25 years ago. And the way that I learned about you was as you were a pretty, were kind of a competitor with a interesting sense of humor. So almost 25 years ago, I was the VP of marketing at a company called OpenSite Technologies. I don't know if you remember this, Scott, and we were kind of in a similar space as Scott. And as I was preparing for today's chat, the one thing I remembered was how I thought you guys left these little signs in our campus, our little campus. And so last night I was thinking, I'm pretty sure that I remember that. And I think we were kind of annoyed. And so last night I looked up, and indeed, these are the signs that they put them up on a lot of exits, I think, on highly trafficked places.
Yeah, we even put a banner over I-40 that, like a big giant 30-foot
banner. Yeah. So I think my memory served correctly. And you happened to also put them right in where we worked. And we were quite amused, annoyed, all of the above. So that was some of my early interactions with you and your company. It was quite pleasant.
That was my early 30s. I was crazier then.
Yeah. So anyway, it's actually, now looking back at it, it's pretty humorous, and it kind of fits we'll talk about your sense of humor in culture settings. So maybe I thought I'd set the stage by telling you all how I originally encountered Scott.
Selling companies is kind of a hard thing to get your head around. I don't know if you've ever seen George Lucas sold Star Wars, and then he has been ripping Disney a new one ever since he did it. So sold my company, and was really the internet was born, and e-commerce was born, and I had a lot of extra capital. I'm a Star Wars fan, so it's a deadly combination. And you guys were plugging up auction sites all over the place. So in the early days of e-commerce, there was more auction sites than fixed price sites. It was kind of a weird time.
This was around the time when eBay was just taking off, when we were both doing kind of similar things in online auctions and having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, so I would go, so I used to buy the little collectibles, and then I started buying really big collectibles. So I have a life-size Star Wars collection. And I built that through auction sites in the late 90s. And what you would do is I would find something I'd want, and I'd find it on 4 auction sites, and then I'd have to, there'd be this sequence of events you would have to piece together that would say, all right, the ABC, and if I'm going to bid to this amount on A, and if I don't win, I'm going to go over to B and bid that same amount. Then I was like, someone should build a tool to do this. And then that was the idea of AuctionRover, was a search engine to go search across all these auction sites, a bidding kind of co-pilot, kind of buddy, kind of bot kind of thing to go bid on your behalf, and then seller tools to go sell across all the different auction sites.
How'd you come up with the name? It's pretty catchy.
Yeah, my first company was called Stingray Software, and everyone loved the animal aspect of it. And then, so we knew we wanted to have more consumer fun name, and a lot of it was just kind of trying to figure out, we wanted the word auction, and then we wanted search, and we ultimately landed on perfect because we could pull a dog into a time frame. He has exposed to entrepreneurship through my dad. And
So
he
you
always took his
basically were
dog to
working
work.
with him.
Yeah, he always took his dog to work, which was kind of one of those things. I was like, that's pretty cool. My dad doesn't work at the bomb plant, but he gets to take his dog to work, so there's pros.
So that was very unusual what he was doing at that point, because now it's of course common for coders to work, to freelance and work the gig economy, but back then it was quite different, especially in your neighborhood.
Yeah, I didn't even know the word entrepreneur until probably college, I would say. You know, it just like wasn't a thing.
But you lived it,
Kinda
sort of.
It's kind of a big word for me too. A lot of E's and R's in there.
Yeah, and I know that you don't do math in like live settings like this, so I won't ask you any math questions, is that correct?
I'll do some.
On your podcast, they talk about that, about the math.
Okay.
They're just rubbing fun at you, I'm sure. But I don't have any math equations in my questions for you, but maybe the audience can put in one. So that's great. Yeah, I love how you were able to take a real world problem that you were having, and of course you were assuming that other people did too, and combine it. And well, now I can look back and say that I love your signs. But I must admit we were a little annoyed back then, but that was a good way to get to know you. So those of you who know people who know Scot, or if you know Scot, you know that Scot is known as being an amazing friend and colleague. And many of you may know also about the Harvard study, the longest study on adult life, which has gotten quite a bit of press in the last many weeks because the director of that program, Robert Waldinger, just published a book called The Good Life. And do any of you know what he concluded was the #1 predictor of happiness?
Relationships.
Is relationships, right. It was really great. I listened to it, and I do a lot of work in positive psychology, and so this study has been very much talked about in all my work I've done there. And last year there were, probably hundreds of us in the audience for the services for Manoj George, who was one of the early CFOs at Red Hat. He passed away just over a year ago. And Scot gave a very moving eulogy, and it was obvious how much your friendship meant to Manoj, and also, of course, how much his friendship meant to you. Also, Gallup Research published a book in the last decade that several of my clients have utilized, and that's called It's a Manager. And one of the findings, I don't know if you guys know about this one, but there was a controversial finding in it about a certain factor that makes people most engaged at work. And do any of you know what that might be?
Relationship with manager.
Oh, that was just in a workshop I did yesterday.
Good snacks.
That was something actually that came out as a reason for people to quit if they don't have a good relationship. So that is actually, that was actually one I used in a workshop yesterday with Cisco. But the one that was controversial that came up that was interesting is having a BFF at work. And yesterday I was asking this group at Cisco, this is an ERG there that I've been working with for a number of years, if they had a BFF at work. And half of them said they did, and then half of them said that they don't, but they are going to work on getting one. And that was one of the exercises that we left them with, was to work on it and think about what you need to do to cultivate that. And in just talking to people who have worked with you, they mentioned this aspect, how you're such a loyal colleague. And it's interesting, recently I was at an NACD event and I ran into Brad. You're pretty new CFO? Yeah.
January.
Yeah, and I was telling him about the happy dance I did after I got Spiffy. And he was quite pleased to hear that. He said that I made his week, I think. And just to let you guys know, I experienced this a few weeks ago in anticipation of getting a chance to have this time with Scot, as I really wanted to understand what this, at least at a high level, what this Spiffy experience was all about. And I really did have a happy dance. I told a good friend about how excited I was, And he said, and he has 4 children, he said, "You're happier than when I had my firstborn." And so I told Brad that story, and he said, "Oh, I think that's what made his week or month." And then also, I see that you have a lot of posts where you're reposting what Ryan Walsh has said recently. And Ryan, I believe, was really early on with you at ChannelAdvisor, and he rose up to become your chief revenue officer, is that correct? Yeah, and I think those are just 2 examples of folks who you've had long bonds with, either that are currently working with you or working again with you, or that you keep in touch with. So that reflects against the BFF at work. And then, were you the only one who brought their dog to work? Tell me about the dog thing, because I imagine your dog has been, the reason you brought your dog to work was your dog was close to you.
Yeah, my first dog was Mac, and he was like my little co-pilot, so he would go everywhere with me. And then I have a kid now. She's kind of a geriatric dog, so she doesn't go in the office. She's kind of like little old lady, and she'll just like go in the garbage can. She doesn't care. She doesn't follow the rules anymore. So she gets to stay at home right now. But yeah, so bringing your dog to, it's kind of a secret management trick because it gives you a reason to walk around. So the dogs like to play ball with a lacrosse stick, so it gives me a reason to go out and like walk around and chat with people. So kind of a, non-intimidating way to go see what everyone's up to.
Yeah, and you did that when it wasn't really a thing. Like, was it really, when people were coming in to interview, was that sort of a cool draw? Like, how did people view it?
It's different, yeah, for sure. The funny story, so we, at ChannelAdvisor, after our IPO, one of the things you can do when you have an IPO is you have this big pot of money, but you can't really spend it because it'll hurt your earnings. So it's kind of this counterintuitive thing. But you can spend it on stuff that goes on the balance sheet, like an office. So we did this really nice office at Perimeter, and in the 11th hour, I said, one more thing, could I bring my dog to work? And like it caused this whole, it went all the way, that was managed by the Duke Realty Company, it went all the way up to the CEO, and just like this whole thing. So like there's 30 pages in that lease that specify all the things around the dog. There's a designated dog relief area, there's all this stuff. So then that had to be published with like an 8K that we put out. So it was kind of funny, it was like out in the, no one ever picked it up in the press. I was like, oh boy, Lauren.
If they did, that would have been a field day, huh?
Lauren at TBJ is gonna write this scathing thing about what a spoiled brat I am that I had to bring my dog.
Sagata didn't get a hold of that.
Yeah, I think it was kind of boring. It was like at the back of an 80-page lease, so no one
That's
saw
actually
that.
quite a number of pages for that, though. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
it was
it's
really
kind of
complicated. I had to use a certain elevator at a certain time, and like it's like highly negotiated. Part of marketing is being different, right? And sticking out. So that's part of what we always try to do. Yeah.
What about the penguin? What's the deal with, how did that happen? Do you have a penguin at home too?
I do not have a penguin. I don't know if that's legal or not, but yeah.
Well, I think you could write something to make it legal.
So what I learned is at Stingray and AuctionRover, no one ever forgot our names, but ChannelAdvisor was like the worst brand I ever created because no one could ever remember the 2 words. And we had this kind of like humpback, they call it humpback case, so capital C, capital A. And it opened the door for a lot of competitors to create confusion. So we had channel intelligence, channel everything. And then, people couldn't find us because they'd leave an N out, it would be ChannelAdvisor, and then it's Channel Advisors, advisory. So I was like, I'm not gonna do that again. So we came up with the word Spiffy, and then my co-founder he was over at Launch Chapel Hill, and he got some credits for an ad agency, and we had him work on the logo, and I said, have him throw some animals in there, and then they did the penguin, and I was like, that's obviously, I wish I had come up with it, but a creative person came up with the idea. And then we iterated on, it was just a little, almost like the men's shirt penguin, and then we iterated on it, made it a little more cartoony, gave it a little bow tie and a towel, so it could be like a little concierge type of a little penguin.
And what are penguins like? Are they always clean? Or tell me more about how it's such a great match for you.
Well, they look like they're wearing a little tuxedo, so
It's the concierge
a little concierge aspect. And it's just something, what I learned at AuctionRover was we had a lot of fun with our logo. At others' expense. Sometimes, yeah. And The other funny story is we would always, for holidays, you know, the dog would change. Google kind of started this with Doodles, where, you know, they changed the Google logo a little bit. So during Easter, he would have bunny ears on and stuff. And then one Christmas, he had a red flashy nose. And then we got an urgent call from the Rudolph Corporation that we were violating the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer trademark, and we had to, you know, he had to go and have a Santa hat on, so we had to get rid of his red nose.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we knew we wanted to have a penguin to kind of have fun and embody the brand and do things like that. Yeah.
That's great.
Question. If I can
Sure,
interrupt
go
that
ahead.
question. So in regards to, you talked about the ChannelAdvisor name and how that didn't quite work for the searching, but if Penguin, do people search on Penguin, and does that translate to good SEO juice? Or?
No, but there's you know, there's an anchor in their mind, and they don't forget the word Spiffy. And I think if we didn't have the penguin, they would. So there's something about anchoring on I guess they call it an anamorphism. You may know this better than I do. This gets into fancy words based on I'm not great at. And so people anamorphically anchor to the penguin, and you know, penguins look spiffy. So I think it helps people with the recall. When we launch at an office park, we put up a table and we have penguin spiffy mascots. You've probably seen them online.
Yeah.
And so they'll go, and people like to get selfies with the penguin and
So it's a
whatnot.
life size then? It looks really big, yeah.
Yeah, there's a human in there. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Got it. Because I saw a really cute video that you had where you were thanking your interns from the summer, and it looked like in the background there were all these, I think they're penguins or like stuffed animals.
Yeah, we have a whole wall of
Very fun.
of penguin stuffed animals. Because once you
Okay, so they're all different. They're all
once we started really getting into the penguin thing, then everyone would just like find penguins and bring them in, and so now we have like, I don't know, 500 different stuffed animal penguins in the office. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that created a nice backdrop for that video. It was very festive.
Yeah. We have a lot of visitors from the entrepreneurship groups at the 3 universities that come by. And what I've learned is they really love those penguins, and I'll let them adopt one while they're visiting, so they can like come and we'll talk to them, they hold the penguin. Yeah, it's fun.
Awesome.
It's funny to see like, 40, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors holding penguins, listening to an entrepreneurial talk.
That's great. That's another way that you're different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. One thing I wanted to spend some time on to understand, because it's something that so many companies struggle with or try to figure out, and that is culture. And it seems like from what you already said is that you have built things that are quite unique from, you were saying, differentiating. So my questions for you here next are on culture is, can you help us understand how you've built the culture and how you would describe them and how they've changed, and how much was intentional versus how much was sort of kind of happened organically? And I think part of it may be you, like your personality, and that becomes part of the culture. Maybe if you can help us understand that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so my first company, I didn't think about it at all, right? So I was just kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I was kind of like a crazy puppy running the company. And then second company started to really dial in on it. And the thing I found with culture is everyone thinks it's a statement in words. And I knew I didn't want to do that. So I'm just kind of a generally skeptical person. I have a technology background, and I guess I'm a little bit of a skeptic kind of person. Have you ever seen Office Space? Anyone seen that movie? So the Bobs get the guy and they're like, what would you say you do here? And that kind of thing. My first internship was at NCR, and on the back of the badge they had their values, and it was like, don't steal, be nice to your coworkers, and think about the customer. And I was like, I was wrapped up in thinking about that as like a 19-year-old, as an intern of that, like, dude, how many people steal, and why do we have to tell them that? Like, why is customer third? And those kinds of things. So I really struggled with this as an entrepreneur until the big opening aha moment for me was the Netflix culture deck. I'm sure you've read that. So Reed Hastings published the Netflix culture deck, and it captured a lot of things I kind of intuitively knew. The biggest one was when you're trying to build a team of top performers, the worst thing you can do is have an underperformer on that team. It destroys that team. And as a tech founder, and I have a lot of empathy for people, I early on would give people too many chances, so, and it's like not fair for them at some point, and not fair, especially not fair for the rest of the team. So started at ChannelAdvisor, started really iterating in on that and getting better at that, mixing in the having fun kind of element of it, and not taking yourself too seriously. So part of culture is actions. You can do the words and they're important, but it's really actions. The other thing I've learned, the company I really admire is Amazon. So at ChannelAdvisor, I had this unique opportunity to see e-commerce get born and watch Amazon. No one would have predicted that they would win, right? They were just a bookstore out of Seattle. And what's fascinating is we would go on tours every quarter and visit all our partners. So I'd go visit Google, eBay, Amazon, PayPal, Yahoo, all those Bay Area companies, Twitter. And invariably, you would go to these meetings, and like eBay was the worst, where you would go meet the CEO of eBay, and our customers were their customers, and we'd have 10 questions. Well, by the end of that meeting, he would have to have 60 people in the room to answer any of the questions. So it's like, oh, you have a shipping question. VP of shipping is Bob. Let me get Bob. The director of shipping is Sally. Bob didn't know the answer. Sally would say, I think Tony on my team knows his answer. So then you go find Tony, and he would know the answer. So then it was like, wow, how does this company operate? Then we go to Amazon, and I would meet with an SVP, and I would say, we have these 10 questions. He'd say, we fixed that one, we knew about that one, it's coming, and I was just like blown away by Amazon and their ability to do things. So I've studied a lot of how their culture works. They have bad parts of their culture. There's all these New York Times articles about people crying at their desk and all kinds of stuff like that. But what Amazon's culture boils down to is this just like relentless focus on the customer and everyone having accountability to that, and it forces them from SVP down to know what's going on, what's impacting their customers, and to have a handle on it. So that's become a big part of the culture that we're trying to build at Spiffy, because we do have this customer obsession with how do we make everyone do a happy dance. Also, I would like to see, I think everyone would like to see your happy dance.
So I thought I was the only one who did it, but then when I went to your website, it was on a social post. There was some other dance that some dude was doing in his office. What was that? And then I looked it up. It had something to do with, it's not Marvel. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Freakazoid? That was an old 80s rap song. So.
Oh, okay, it's an old 80s rap song. Okay. So I realized that there's variations on the happy dance.
Do you do like a Peanuts kind of do, like that kind of happy dance? Or?
I'm still practicing different variations.
Okay, all right.
So I'll be ready to video and post. Maybe you can post it too somewhere at some point. But
I can arrange for you to do it in a penguin suit if you want.
Oh, that would be really fun. That would be awesome. But yeah, I was quite impressed with that dance that I saw of the dude in the office. So back to the Amazon, are there certain aspects, you said that you really studied it, are there certain things that you could share with us, or examples how you took some things that you thought were really great, and then maybe some things that you didn't think were that good, that you then applied to your world?
Yeah, so Amazon has, and I've read a lot of these culture decks and things, and most of them are pretty cheesy, and they don't really help. Like Google's early on was do no evil. Well, that's super subjective, right? And it's not really helpful to the line level manager. So then I was talking to some Amazon folks and trying to understand why the culture is. And they're like, well, it's our I think it's 12 management principles. I was like, tell me more. And one of them gave me their management principle book, and it's like 40 pages. It was by far the best corporate document I've ever read. So they would say, things like, again, it's kind of like when I read the Netflix, it put words to things I kind of was thinking about, but I didn't know how to put it down on paper. So they would say things like, we hire managers because there's all these gray areas running a business, and your job is to figure out the gray areas. And we want you to, our North Star is the customer, is like the number one, and they spend a lot of time on that. But then they go into it and they talk about other things, like one of their beliefs is instead of this, so a lot of my curiosity of this comes from ChannelAdvisor. So ChannelAdvisor is over 800 people, and as CEO, I started, when we were like 600 people, I started to see we were like really slowing down in how we could execute. It was frustrating. I was like, what did I do wrong here? And in hindsight, that just kind of that typical corporate structure wasn't really working where we needed it to. But at the point in time I realized that, it was very hard to change it because we're a public company. You can't just go like do surgery on a public company like that. So one of the things Amazon talks about is 2 pizza teams. So no team should be too big that it can't be fed with 2 pizzas. People obsess on the 2 pizza thing. But basically what they're saying is, it's better to have lots of little teams that may be inefficient because you have team A through Z and A and P are kind of working on the same thing. Your intuition is, no, we should be really efficient and make sure we're looking at that. But Amazon says, no, the speed is better and the innovation that comes out of small teams is better than overwhelms the inefficiency. So that's one that's we're replicating at Spiffy, which is kind of fun. It creates a lot of friction because you have situations where like there's salespeople that don't report to the CRO, right? And that feels weird. And so then what's the CRO do? Well, they set the standards for sales, but sales reps can live on different teams. So it's really interesting to think through the organizational dynamics of that and what it means. Another one is, as a company grows, one of my favorite books is The Innovator's Dilemma. I'm sure you guys, Clay Christensen. He talks a little bit about how to get out of that, but as a company grows, you add legal and finance functions, and it becomes harder for the company to say yes, because those functions are naturally doing their job and reducing risk. So, we missed a quarter one time and I was digging into it, and the finance team had said no to like 30 deals. And I was like, holy cow, how did this happen? And they were just like, they had been given a template, and if something didn't match that template, they said no. And so, another Amazonism is to agree, disagree and commit. And, everyone in the company should be leaning into this customer piece. And you can disagree, but if we as a company agree to do something, you have to disagree and commit. Because in corporate America, someone will be like, so if I got to the finance team and jammed all those through, everyone would have been pissed at me, right? They'd be like, screw that, why do we have this template? So you have to really create this mentality in the company that if we're gonna make some exceptions and do some things, we should do it. And then a last one that I like from Amazon is they have this concept of, as a manager, is this a one-way decision or a two-way decision? They call it a one-way door or a two-way door. So is this a decision that if we make it, we can't go back? And if those should have much higher consideration than a decision, well, let's go try this, and if it doesn't work, we can always come back. That's testing and not really a decision. So a lot of people approach those as decisions, but they should be test instead of these decisions. So there's a lot of really meaty stuff in there that I highly recommend. There's a book that goes through this. It's called, I'll send it to you so you can send folks. It's something like Amazon Management Secrets, something like that. It's really good. So it's from an senior Amazonian that kind of boils this stuff down.
Yeah, I can't wait to read that. Yeah. And Clay Christensen, I had a chance to meet with him at 2 reunions ago at Harvard, and that was so moving. He had just written a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? I don't know if you know that book.
Yep.
I think it was maybe his last book. And he was already suffering then. He was using a cane when he gave his talk, and we all had tears in our eyes because his wife was actually in my row, and he talked about how you were all like, think about your job. He was giving an example about his job as a husband, like what was I hired to do, and it was just amazing. And of course, we all know him from the book that all his work in innovation, but then later on, his last works were about how you'll measure your life. And so he's definitely an icon at Harvard Business School. Yeah.
I got invited to a conference. It was this B2B conference, and I accepted to speak about Amazon. And I looked at the agenda, and I had to go on after Clay Christensen. I was like, ugh. But it was amazing because I got to be like, in the green room with him and like watch his talk. And then afterwards, I was so fanboying, I just like stumbled through my talk.
He's such a kind man, because I remember there was this huge line to talk to him, and I was at that point working on a book that actually a section mate of mine who's a professor with him. He said you gotta get into his latest book, because it was beyond, because I was going to write a Project Peak Climbing the Mountains of Entrepreneurship just about that, but then he said no. Then I was my classmate, and he said you gotta like business and beyond. You gotta like talk to Clay. And Clay knew that his time was pretty short by then, but he said, oh, Grace, he gave me his card and said to set up time with me, but I wasn't able to because he was, anyway, he ended up passing away, but he was so generous, such an amazing man. Well, great, that's really helpful in the culture. And I think also there's this interesting humor that kind of crosses through a lot of your work. And like I was watching your Paul and Geddon video, that was hilarious. Basically they were using, or maybe you can talk about it, but do you think, because I think you just have a kind of quirky sense of humor, is that correct? Maybe, how does that like feed into the culture in what you all do? Maybe you can talk a little about the video creation.
Yeah, I'd love to take credit for all that, and CEO, that's part of my job, but
Someone write your jokes for you.
yeah, that's all our marketing team, you know, so.
They write your jokes.
I have my own jokes, but they do their jokes. So, you know, I think it was 4 years ago, we thought it would be funny to do, we got pretty good at these little viral videos. And then we did one around pollen and it took off. One of my favorite, I did come up with pollen again, so I'll take credit for that. So one of my favorite things is to try to create new words and see if I can get them into the zeitgeist. My best one was ship again, where during COVID, it was obvious that the amount of products that would have to be shipped exceeded the capacity to ship them. So I coined that ship again. You can probably see a trend here. I like again put on things. And that made it all the way to the Today Show and Good Morning America, where they were like, Bob, tell me about this ship again. And I was like, I invented that word. It's so funny to like watch that happen.
That's very cool.
It's the power of social media. You can kind of like get these things to propagate. And then so I said, let's call it Pollen-geddon and like really kind of lean into it and have fun. And then the marketing team did a video 3 years ago. It was our most popular video. And then the weird thing about Spiffy is we're really known for our consumer stuff, but it's only 15% of what we do. 85% of what we do is fleet. So then the marketing team got really busy on fleet stuff. So we missed a year or two because we had other priorities. But then this year, the stars aligned and we were able to do another Pollen-geddon video. So they went all out on it. It was a lot of fun.
And so that was one of my later questions I'm actually about to ask you now about that. So in the beginning, did you know that B2C, it sounds like, is a huge part of your revenue stream? Does the B2C, how much does it help feed the B2B? Because do people have happy dances and they realize they can like do it at work, or how does that work? How does the relationship between the two go?
Yeah, so two pieces. So one of the things I realized at ChannelAdvisor was everyone thinks B2B and B2C are very different. Like VCs are even oriented this way, right? So one of my challenges at Spiffy is I run into VCs and they're pretty much in a lane of B2B or B2C. Most of them, you know, we disqualify ourselves out. So like 80% of VCs are focused in a lane. We're not in a lane, so therefore we disqualify out 80% of VCs. Because they'll look at our business and they'll be like, well, I love the B2B part, can you turn off the B2C? And we're like, not gonna do that. And then we'll talk to consumer people and they'll say, can you turn off that annoying B2B part? So it's kind of weird the world is structured that way. But what we learned from e-commerce was, it used to be the thinking was that the business buyer is very different than the consumer. But at the end of the day, they're people, right? And Amazon said, well, you know, we're gonna go after the business world, and everyone laughed and said, you don't know anything about the business world. And you know, the Grangers of the world and Fastenals, all these B2B companies said, our customers love our relationships with them, and that they can call us at any time. And if they need to buy something, we send them a PDF and then with a catalog, and then they can call us back with the parts number, and then we'll ship it to them in about 3 weeks. They love that experience. Amazon said, how about if we get rid of that relationship thing, put it all online and give them fast, free 2-day shipping. And then Amazon Business became like a $5 billion behemoth and just disrupted the B2B world. Then all Amazon did was they added links into procurement software like Ariba and all these different things. So Amazon basically said people love convenience, whether it's for their home existence or they're ordering paper clips and whatever at work. So convenience works no matter what the context, B2B or B2C. So that was step one. So then when we launched Spiffy, we decided early on that we really wanted to, an Amazonism is you got to own the customer experience, right? And they go to the extent of, you see the extent they go. They've built 200 fulfillment centers and 100,000 vans that are coming to your house. So they like really own that customer experience. So we said we cannot, some competitors had tried to do a 1099 approach to what we're doing, and it failed miserably. And I I think the reason why is because they couldn't own the customer experience. So we decided that our technicians would be our employees. And then if you, another Amazonism is start at the perfect customer experience, which results in Grace doing a happy dance. How do you build that? And what it really requires is a technician we've trained, and then also a lot of specialized equipment. To get someone's car looking like it did the bit they bought it, there's like all this special equipment you have to have. You have to have a blowout hose. You have to, if they have a dog with pet fur, there's a series of things you do. If they have artillery fungus on their car, I'm the software guy here, but it's like a pretty complicated, thing to be able to take all the pieces you need for someone's car to look almost as good as the day they bought it. So,
That's so interesting what you just said,
yeah.
the day you bought it, because that's exactly what I said to people. I said, oh my goodness, I have a white Tesla with white interior. My son said, it says it was clean, it always looked good before, compared to his car, it always looked clean before. So that's what I said. I said, it looks exactly like the day I drove it off the lot. So that was your goal, that,
Yeah.
okay,
we
good.
call that the Stormtrooper Tesla, by the way. You have a Stormtrooper Tesla.
Okay.
So early on at Spiffy, we were committed to having vans and technicians. And then if you think about that, then it becomes an optimization problem. Like, how busy can we keep these? So the perfect day, the perfect theoretical day for our technician is they always start at a central warehouse. They go a mile, they stay there all day doing services, and they go back. That's like the most optimized day. Well, residential is not that, right? So they leave, they go to house number 1, they set up, they do the service, they take down, they go to house number 2. They can do 3 or 4 services that way. It works, and the economics are good, but the economics would be better if we could have that perfect day. So we were always kind of like thinking about how could we get there. The obvious answer is fleet, and we could never crack fleet. We got one step closer with Office Park. So Office Park before COVID was awesome. It's kind of coming back. It's a lot trickier post-COVID, but it's really coming back pretty materially. I visited an Office Park yesterday and had to look for a parking spot. I was very excited. I was like, yes, people are back in the office. And so then we introduced oil change, and we did that for consumers because that was one of the top things they wanted us to add. The number one thing people want us to do is North Carolina state inspection. So I'll go ahead. I always get that question in an audience this many people. We can't do that because a lobbying group has made it where you have to go to a shop. So to undo that, we're going to have to come up, figure out through some political thing how to do that. Part of my DNA is to stay as far away from government as possible. So we have not, I don't know if I'll ever employ a lobbyist or not. So the number 2 thing we get a lot of requests for is on-demand fueling. This one kind of bifurcates the audience. Some people say, that's ridiculous. How could you be so lazy that you can't go to a gas station? Other people say, oh my God, that would change my life. You have a Tesla, so you don't care. But there's companies in the Bay Area, there's Booster, Yoshi, and a couple that are doing on-demand fueling. We looked at on-demand fueling, and we can't make the economics make sense to us. But now Shell has come out with it, and it makes sense for them because they're going from crude out of the oil to your house. It actually is accretive for them because they're cutting out 3 or 4 middlemen versus other startups are buying it from Shell and adding cost to it, which doesn't make sense. So then we landed on number 3, which is oil change. We introduced oil change for consumers, and serendipity happened where we literally had oil change. Our first iteration was a trailer we pulled behind a wash van, and we were just testing it out. And part of our innovation for oil change is we wanted to use a vacuum system. So we vacuumed the oil out of your car through the dipstick. And the reason we do that is twofold. Number 1, the plug in the car is the hardest part of an oil change. It has to have a very specific thread, way you thread it, and it has to have a certain torque. It's very hard to get that right over and over again. So this eliminates the need to touch that thing. And then the other one is all of our customers are very environmentally sensitive, and we like the idea of not using gravity to take oil where it could eventually hit the ground and run into a drain. When we vacuum it, we have total containment of the oil. It goes right from the vehicle into a containment facility for us. And it goes through a clear straw. It's kind of a fun demo. So we've had all these folks that don't believe it'll work, and they see the oil go all the way in the car. It's kind of, and then it runs for a while, then it clears. So that's a good demo. So when we introduced oil change, we literally were at Enterprise at RD doing some washes, and the guy there said, "Do you guys have the trailer said Spiffy oil?" He said, "You guys do oil changes?" We said, "Yeah." He said, "You see those 30 cars over there? They're waiting for oil changes. Could you knock them out?" And our guy was like, "Sure." So we discovered is rental car companies and then now other fleets, they have this acute oil change problem where they have to do the preventive maintenance on the vehicle because it ties into the value of the vehicle as it comes off lease. So they have to do that, and they ground the cars if there's not an oil change. So what they do before Spiffy is they do some of them themselves, but they can only get to 10%. So 90% are valeted to a quick lube place. That's what we displaced. So that opened up fleet for us.
I
And
think
then-
that's great.
Yeah.
It kind of stumbled on it. Well, not really.
Yeah,
but-
some, you know, I will always claim to do something smart, but this was pure serendipity. You know, and, yeah, this was, you know, this is kind of part of the
But
fun.
you were there, so I mean, you.
I was there, yeah. I'll take credit.
Yeah.
The fun thing about a startup is you pull this thread, you're like, I want to like explore this area, and for me it was, could we change car care? You know, it's like one of those. I don't know if you go to the pharmacy a lot, but like you go to the pharmacy and you're like, this stinks, and someone's going to have to fix this, right? I wish Amazon would run a pharmacy. I'm not going to take on pharmacies. But you know, have you ever had the experience where you go and they call you and they're like, your thing's ready, and you go in and you're like, Wingo, and they're like, they look over here, and then they look over here, and they look over there, and then they look here, and then they talk to the pharmacist, and she says, did you look over there? And they look over there, and they can't find it. They're like, we haven't done that one yet. You're just like, you called me to come. Yeah, I don't know, it's our system. Every time, that always happens to me. I don't know if I'm cursed or something. Another really bad customer experience is car care. And you know, the whole car care industry is stuck in the innovator's dilemma. And it just kind of just once I started researching this, I was like, oh, this is like wide open for us to go disrupt. So that was the thread we pulled on, and it's kind of interesting what's come out the other side.
So is there an opportunity with charging? Probably not, I'm gonna guess, because.
There is, we have an on-demand charging pilot. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think of it as multi-unit living, so apartment buildings, they can't keep up
Yeah.
with the needs,
Yeah.
and office parks. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's not enough, there's
Yeah.
only like one or two chargers, and there's
Yeah.
10 cars that need it, okay,
Yeah.
it's only gonna increase.
Yeah, the challenge is Teslas don't need it, right? Teslas have enough range that unless you're doing something crazy, you just charge at home every day, which is what I have a Tesla as well, it's probably what you do.
I actually don't have a charger at home, can you believe it? Because I'm like
You
trying to
use the
figure out how
superchargers.
long. Yeah, because because after COVID, I don't drive that much, so I don't drive as much, so I charge at my 5 miles per hour, but yeah, I have to use superchargers every now and then for trips, yeah.
Okay. So they already have all that figured out. It's
But it would
the,
be cool if I could have,
the next generation, a lot of the American cars, so a Mach-E, you know, all these next generation EVs, they have a lot lower range, and you do need to kind of like Leafs, you need to top those up. Yeah, and plug-in hybrids. There's gonna, you know, most forecasts show there's gonna be more plug-in hybrids than EVs.
Okay, right, because I have a long range, so
Yeah.
that's why I'm able to keep it pretty high, yeah.
Yeah, so that's an area we experiment in, but, you know, it's not a material part of our business.
Interesting. How interesting. Thank you for that. The next question I have for you is on the topic of psychological safety. My last Harvard Business School reunion, I had a chance to sit in the classroom of Amy Edmondson, who some of you might be familiar with her work in psychological safety. She's sort of the queen of psychological safety. And some of you also may be familiar with Project Aristotle at Google, which utilized a lot of her work, and that is finding out at Google, they were really, really interested in figuring out what made up the perfect team. What elements of a team would create the most innovation, the most success? So they poured over tons and tons and tons of data as they could. To figure this out. And actually what they found out was quite simple. It's two things. One is that teams where each person can have a fairly equal voice. And then number two, where people could intuit other people's feelings. And so that was the outcome of that, and that's what psychological safety is. I was wondering if you could share with us if you think that psychological safety has been at each of your companies, and how people maybe feel safe and vulnerable in meetings and sharing. Maybe if you could apply what I just said about psychological safety to maybe some of your environments, and if you think it's been good, if you guys have worked on improving, if you could comment on that concept and how you think it's worked for you or not worked.
Yeah, so I'm just learning about it today, so I wouldn't say that I'm leveraging that specifically. But, you know, part of the culture, if you're really focusing on the customer, anyone around the table should be able to say, you know, I have this piece of data about our customer, or, you know, this is going on with the customer, let's try this with the customer. And we should all stop and listen to that. So that's the customer's the level playing field for me. And, you know, I don't care how old you are, gender, any of that stuff, because if we all look at the customer, then we're gonna get a diverse set of opinions on how best to serve the customer, and that's gonna make the whole thing better. So it kind of lines up with, I think, what you're saying by having this customer orientation.
Yeah, so now I'm realizing this happy dance is a goal, it sounds like it's a very strong goal of yours, of what happened to me is
Yeah.
what you wanted from the beginning to create.
Yeah, the Amazonism is, they call it a perfect purchase. They have another word for it. But, you know, like, what is the perfect customer experience? And then what's getting in the way of that? And how do we just like constantly and religiously get rid of those things? The one interesting thing at Spiffy I've never encountered before, and you know, I'll ask your advice on this. You may have some ideas. Is there's shades of customer experience, and it's really interesting. So here's a example. So right now, when you go to book a Spiffy, let's say it's Wednesday. Tomorrow we may already know that we're sold out, but we will still let you try to pick tomorrow, and then we will ask you to move. The reason we do that is, my argument is, because we now know that Grace wants car wash on Thursday, next Thursday we can add more people to the schedule and solve the supply problem. If we didn't know that, we wouldn't be able to solve that long-term customer experience thing. But to get to the long-term customer experience we want, we had to give you a little bad short-term customer experience. So I've never encountered these, like, you know, shades of customer experience, positives and negatives. So it's really interesting to try to think through that. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, and then, you know, another thing I like to do is, I just presented it to you as a binary. Is there a way to like unbinary it and try, like, you know, a third option, and what does that look like? So we spend a lot of time, you know, that's the kind of stuff we debate.
Is there like a waiting list option, or so you would tell me yes, but then
So
you would let me register for?
Yeah, in the booking flow, it really clearly says it's a request, and then you have to get a confirmation. But, you know, the convenience store consumer is like, dang it, I want it Thursday at 2, why can't I get it Thursday at 2? So, you know, so then the alternative would be what we call airline booking, where we say, sorry, Thursday's sold out, you know, do you want to do Sunday at 2? Now my argument on that is, the problem is we now lose sight that we have this demand peak on Thursday, and we'll just merrily go along the way with 10 techs on Thursday, when actually we may need 20 technicians on Thursday. So those are the kind of things we spend a lot of time thinking about, and it's intellectually challenging, and it doesn't really open the door for, you know, I don't like sitting next to Sally because you know, she chews her food loud, and you know, those kinds of things, you know, are huge distractions for a company. So if we're really aligned on the customer, and we're having these discussions, and everyone's thinking about this kind of stuff, it tends to result in, you know, what you're talking about.
Well, I have a lot more questions I could ask, but in the interest of time and to let you guys, I want to make sure that you guys can ask your questions. So I want to open up to see if you have questions, and I can always sprinkle mine in. Go ahead.
Hey there, thanks for sharing, great stuff. So, with entrepreneurship, sometimes some of the interesting areas are, one, how did you into it or identify that initial white space opportunity, and so if you could say a few words on that. And then also, the other interesting part about entrepreneurship is that you often have a lot of failures or missteps or pivots and things of that nature. So what are some of the interesting learning opportunities and pivots and missteps that have occurred in various journeys?
Yeah, I'll stick to Spiffy because it's the most recent. So the idea for Spiffy came from two things. Number one, in 2003, I bought a car wash in Cary as a diversification thing. I figured if I'm way out here on the risk spectrum with what I'm doing in ChannelAdvisor and stuff, I need something on the other end of that. And it's a fair argument to say I have failed at that, because I took that unrisky thing and I like moved it way back over into the risky category of strengths. So I'll accept the L on that one. And then so I had that, and then I had my first Uber experience around 2012. It's a funny story how I even came to know of Uber. So one of our early ChannelAdvisor customers was this guy named Josh out of New York, and I think he quit college. I don't know his whole story. I think he was at NYU and he quit college to start an eBay business. And ChannelAdvisor was fun because we had 3,000 customers. 1,500 of them were like the Nikes and Macy's in corporate America. So it was always fun to go talk to the internal disruptors there that were like, the early digital people at Nike were, they were like rebels inside of Nike, and now they've taken over. But then the other half of our customers were super entrepreneurial, like this guy, Josh. So this guy set up one of the early eBay stores to sell NCAA branded stuff. So he had some supplier in New York he was getting this from and selling it on eBay. So he called me in 2012, and so this guy was like 23, and he had like a $4 or $5 million top line business selling this stuff on eBay, probably printing 2 to 3 million a year in profits. He's like, I'm gonna wind down my eBay business. I was like, oh my God, what happened? Did the NCAA shut you down? He's like, no, I'm gonna go join this startup, and guess what? They're gonna revolutionize taxis. And I was like, don't do that. Taxis are a monopoly. Everyone has tried to disrupt taxis, has not succeeded. He's like, no, we're gonna do it here in New York, and I'm gonna run it, and it's gonna be awesome. And I was like, what's it called? He's like, it's called Uber Taxi. So at that point, it was called Uber Taxi. So he ultimately joined, and he was like employee number 4 and became a billionaire. So don't take career advice from me. That's my number one. So if he listened to me, he would have been a lowly, 10 millionaire, and now he's a billionaire. But I was like, well, Josh is pretty smart. Maybe I'm wrong here. The other thing that happens a lot in entrepreneurship is you realize is very humbling. ChannelAdvisor, we realized, we would have like Dyson sign up one quarter and Rock Bottom Golf, and you'd be like, oh, Dyson's gonna be the winner in that cohort, and then Rock Bottom Golf would win. You'd be like, what the heck? So one thing I learned about e-commerce is you cannot predict the winners. I was like, Josh is pretty smart, and then he let me into Uber pretty early, and then I had my first Uber experience right around the ChannelAdvisor IPO, and I was like, okay, I study a lot of consumer behavior like you do, and in e-commerce we talk a lot about the consumer being split into a value-oriented consumer and a convenience-oriented consumer. Grace is like the ultimate one of these, and so they're busy, they kind of have a connection in their mind between their time and money, and they will trade those off. The value-oriented consumer, everyone has that friend that'll irrationally drive 30 miles they'll wait in that Costco line for a nickel off gas for 4 hours, and they're idling the whole time, burning up the savings. And you just can't, you can argue that to them, and they're just like, no, but it's a nickel cheaper, and so that's the value-oriented consumer. They're always drawn in by a low price, and they're not really brand, because of that, they don't really stick to a brand. They don't have any brand loyalty, because they're always drawn by a lower price. But on the convenience side, if you can save someone time in their life, they value that much more than money savings. So all that was rattling around in my head, and then I had my first Uber experience, and the connected dots for me very quickly were, I'm also a hobby economist, and if you look at GDP, consumer goods are 5 trillion, consumer services are 10 trillion. So as people, we consume twice as many services as goods. So I was like, services are going to go digital in the form of all this will be with my phone. I have a house, and just like the pharmacy, home services are like the worst experience ever, because everyone had this one where the HVAC guys come to my house, they're like, I've been doing this for 40 years and I've never seen anything like this. I'm like, dude, I think it's the compressor. Yeah, but wow. And then they don't have the part on the truck, they never show up, they give you windows, they don't show up in the window. Everything is bad about the service industry, right? So I was like, this is how retail used to be. It used to be, before e-commerce, you'd like need a pair of shoes for your kid, you'd have to go to like 12 places to find them. So I was like, this is gonna happen, and that's gonna be, we've seen e-commerce, which is the digitalization or software eating retail. Software is gonna eat services, and that's gonna be twice this opportunity of e-commerce. And having been through e-commerce, I felt like I was uniquely situated to try to tackle part of that. And then I landed on the car care part because we already had car wash experience from owning a car wash. A company launched out of Silicon Valley called Cherry, and they were going to do Uber for car wash. And they burned through $10 million very quickly. And I was like, that's interesting. And as we went to see what they did the 1099 thing. So they had a really weird, they went after the value-oriented consumer with a $20 wash. So their experience was, Grace orders a car wash, it's really awesome, it's great. But then like imagine an Uber driver shows up to your house and they're like, Grace, can I come in and get some water? So that's the first experience, was kind of weird. You don't want some random person coming to your house. So maybe you give them a hose. And then they wash your outside of your car, just like your son would do, right? Or like a neighborhood kid, and you're like, I paid $20 for that. and as car wash people, we knew that wouldn't be really good because you don't have all the tools to get all the stuff off. And then the real impact on people think they want the exterior of their car done, but it's the interior that makes the most impact, because you spend more time on the inside of your car, and it's harder to get that clean. So that led us to then, so then I started doing research, and I found I'm a big proponent of Net Promoter Score. I'm sure you guys have thought about that, and Bain Consulting came up with it, and I'm sure there's been Harvard.
Fred Raquel was my first boss at
Oh, really?
Bain, yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. But a
Houston.
client of mine told me about the Net Promoter Score. I said, oh wow, I knew the author. He was my boss.
Yeah. So in the e-commerce world, we spend a lot of time talking about Net Promoter Score, but it's in the 30 to 100 bracket part of Net Promoter Score. So Grace and I could set up a Shopify store and sell, widgets, and we would get a Net Promoter Score of 30, and then we'd have to work really hard to get higher than that. So I was researching the car care industry, and it was like, the car care industry is excited that we have moved our Net Promoter Score to -15. I was like, what? And I was like, wait a minute. And then I started researching, and Jiffy Lube has some of the worst Net Promoter Scores out there. And it's because they have fallen into this innovator's dilemma of they do everything you can do wrong as a business, everything consumers hate. And so they bait and switch you with the price of an oil change. And then they love to get, they especially prey on women. What I've learned from Spiffy, that I kind of intuited a little bit, but is women hate the car care experience because they feel like they're getting taken advantage of. Jiffy Lube, they even had class action lawsuits because they train people, their technicians, on how to do this. Get the car on the lift and then walk the young lady up underneath there and say, ma'am, if you were my daughter, I couldn't let you leave with these brakes. We're gonna need to flush your steering fluid, and they come up with all these margin adding things. So Jiffy Lube has like a -80 Net Promoter Score to like -95 with women. So I was thinking, another thing I've learned, and I think this is a Steve Jobs quote, is people get stuck in their habitual behaviors, but if you can do something 10 times better, they will change. So I was like, if we can't do 10 times better than Jiffy Lube, we should pack it up and go home. So that's a very long answer, but those things all added, and I was like, let's kind of poke around in this digital services around car care and see what we can do there. So that was kind of how it all came together. So we launched an experiment out of one of our car washes, learned a ton. So now I'll pivot to the second part of failure. So the first failure was, to set the story here, you have to kind of envision my co-founder. He's like the opposite of me. He's an ex-football player at Georgetown, so he's like 6 foot tall, kind of a commanding kind of guy. He cusses a lot. I'm not gonna do that. He's ex-Army, so ex-military people, cuss words come right out of their mouth all the time, and then also he creates acronyms like crazy, and I have to like stop him from creating acronyms because he'll be like, we're gonna go to the LPL and the ZPF, and I'm like, Carl, you've made the company so complicated, no one can join and understand what we do. So I broke him of that habit, but he still cusses like a sailor. And so we went to launch, we put our first app out there, and at a physical car wash, most of your business is on weekends. So Carl, on the operations side, he had staffed us for weekends. So we put the app out there, and all the order requests started to come in for Thursday at office parks. And we're like, that's weird, because that's the exact opposite of what we do at a physical car wash. I was doing the happy dance, because to me it said, this is an early signal that whatever people have in the real world isn't what they want, because when we give them the power, they're saying, I don't want A, I want B. And I was like, yes, I think we're onto something. He was like, expletive. I had to go change his whole schedule and everything. So he was just like, and then we almost got to a checkmate situation. So everyone wanted their car washed on Thursdays at office parks. So we started doing that. Then what we found is traditional detailers have a huge negative brand, and I wasn't really aware of that. And what we found is around here, where we launched in Raleigh, the office parks said, if we tried to do Frontier, they would have said this. So security would run us off. They would say, we don't allow detailing on site. And we'd say, why? And they would say, sketchy vans, sketchy folks, and then uninsured, and they leave a chemical spill in our parking lot. So we're like, okay. So we really cranked up. The other thing we realized we'd done wrong is we had white vans with blue penguins, so we inverted that. So we kind of looked like traditional detailers. So the first thing we did is we went the exact opposite. And the penguin was small, and now the penguin's huge. So we really kind of amped up our brand. And then we really amped up the background checks we do for our technicians. So, and then they're badged and uniformed. And then we went and got a huge insurance policy, so that was easy to solve. The hardest one to solve was the environmental thing. So this is where we came up with the wash mat. So we at a physical car wash, you have to reclaim all the water. So it all flows through the tunnel and it goes to this water reclamation system. So we were like, what are we gonna do? We looked at steam, you can do waterless wash, but water has the best outcome for the vehicle. Those other two can damage the technician or the vehicle. So we were really married to water. So we invented a whole system called the reclamation system. So basically what we do is we mobilify what you do at a physical car wash. So at Spiffy, we bring all the water with us because it's a weird customer experience to say, hey Grace, can we come and get some water? We don't wanna do that. So we bring all the water with us. We wash every car on a mat. That mat has about a 4-inch lip to it, so it catches all the runoff. We use only green chemicals. We found out detailers also use very caustic chemicals because it saves them time. So we found green chemicals that are just as good. And then the water pools, we suck it up out of there, back up on the van into a gray water vessel, and at the end of the day, we reclaim all that by putting it through a reclamation system at our warehouse. So
It's really amazing.
yeah,
It's
so that
amazing to watch.
was like a failure. You know, those are two examples of failing, but you know they weren't cataclysmic failures. But you know every I get this question a lot. I've had 4 successes, and people are like, you never failed. The answer is I fail every day, right? So, but it's little failures that we learn from, and they lead to kind of like that next thing that we get to.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, so it sounds like, customer experience is core to the strategy, and the tip of the spear on that is these tech-enabled technicians, right? So it sounds like you invested a lot in the technology to make them great at what they do. But I'm curious, in a very tight labor market, how are you finding these technicians? How are you keeping them? How are you making sure you have the right people who can, stay engaged and retain them well? Just how have you thought about the human capital challenge of this endeavor?
Yeah, and this has been the thing I've learned the most about, because I've never had a business that had hourly employees. This is where I think Amazon does a terrible job, right? So this is like, Amazon warehouse workers is like, you're basically, it's really kind of a fun thing to think about, because if you go visit one, they all have a thing on there, it's called a rabbit, and that's the computer. And what happens is, you'll go to one of these fulfillment centers and there'll be like 500 employees in there, and they're all being told what to do by a brain in the sky. It's like an AI in the sky. It's kind of really weird when you think about it. Like there's no manager in there telling people what to do. It's like the AI brain is telling them all what to do. So, it'll say, go pick this package, go do this, you're on bathroom break, 5 minutes, you're back, do this, you're on lunch break, do this, come back. So this thing on their wrist, they're basically robots. It's kind of strange. So that's not it's interesting to think about that, but it's not a great career path, right? Hey, here's the pitch, you're gonna get $15 an hour, you're gonna be a robot, and this robot's gonna tell you, this computer, this guy is gonna just run your day, and it's the same every day after day after day. So, as we've poked around here, a company I admire is Starbucks. So Starbucks kind of said, we're not gonna call you a burger flipper or something like that, you're gonna be a barista. So they branded the hourly worker. Then they do a really good job of giving people a career path. And just like corporate America, they give you 2 ladders. They give you the management ladder and the individual contributor ladder. So I was just at Starbucks. I know the Starbucks over here very well. If you ever go to that Starbucks, you have a high probability of seeing me there. So the lady that used to manage that Starbucks now runs the North Carolina region. And the guy that runs it now, he started as a cashier. So we've replicated that. But even more, not as many people want to be managers as want to be individual contributors. So on the individual contributor side at Starbucks, you have these levels of being a barista. And then you can, if you learn a lot about coffee, you can go to one of their select stores and you can do all the fancier drippies and nitro things. I'm not that deep into coffee. And so we've tried to replicate that. So at Spiffy, the individual contributor ladder is you come in as a wash oil tech. And then if you work hard at that, get scores. The other thing we do is we get all this on the consumer side of the business. We get all this real-time data. We decided early on the customer experience is important enough. We are going to rate gate the payment. So we don't let you get to the payment until you rate us. Now, ultimately, being capitalist, if someone doesn't rate us after 48 hours, we will hit your credit card. We don't give away free car washes if you don't rate us. But 80% of our customers rate our technicians. So we have this really rich data on how they're all doing. So as we use that data to improve them and train them and get them up the ladder of Net Promoter Score, then we add things. So then they can become a tire tech. And then now we're working on light repair. We do a lot of lighter repair, which is brakes and other kind of more repair work. And then to do that next leap, this is kind of like where we are today. Where I want to do it is I want to be able to pay for them to go and get ASE certified at a tech school. What we found is these trades are really interesting. We can talk about this for an hour. You know, if you just parachute in, you're like, why aren't people just going out and getting these certifications? Well, the problem is you're saying to someone that's, you know, that's got a family, hey, I need you to take like a year and a half off and go get an ASE certification. They can't do that, right? Because the income stream, you know, not only does it drive up their income stream, but now they're gonna have to pay the $15K to get the certification. So that's why we have this lack of CDLs and all these kinds of things, is we've kind of failed as a ability to on-ramp that. So what we're gonna do is set up a system where we will pay for that, just like you would pay for an MBA type thing. And you know, so that's the individual contributor side. And then on the management side, if you are interested in that, you start as a technician, you become a shift supervisor, a supervisor, a market manager, a general manager, an area manager, and a regional manager. And through our 45 cities, something like, you know, half of them are run by people that used to be technicians, and we're really proud of that. And you know, most of these are young men. We have some women, but we're like 95% young men, and most of them are high school educated. Most of them are people of color, and you know, what happened is the education system failed them. They got off the path, but then something happens, and usually they have a kid or get married, and now they're like awake, and they're like, I want to change my life. So we're trying to give them that career path. Not everyone buys into this, but when they do, we want to reward it. And for a lot of them, it's really exciting. So you know, one of our Atlanta GMs, our supervisor, was doing really well. His name's Ricky, and he's kind of a funny guy. And Carl was opening up. We were going to open up Vegas, and Ricky said, you know, I think I'd like to go to Vegas. And Carl said, really? Are you serious? And Ricky's like, yeah. Carl's like, pack your shit. And Ricky's like, what? He's ex-military. Sorry, I had to cuss there. And you know, he's like, you know, when do you want me to go? Carl's like, right the F now. Let's go. We're going to Vegas. Ricky's like, okay. So Ricky runs Vegas now, and yeah. So it's kind of like, well, be careful what you ask for, kind of things. So you know, about half of our cities are run by previous technicians, and we're really proud that we've done that. You know, we still have churn and all those things, and not everyone buys into the program. It's a hard job, and you got to like really buckle into it. But if you can kind of come in and follow our process, we have a lot of career paths for you. That's how we're trying to differentiate ourselves versus if you went to a quick lube place, it's just like, no, you're just gonna, you know, you don't really have a career path at Jiffy Lube. Maybe you could be a manager of that store, but it's pretty unlikely. And they're a franchise system, so you can't really, you know, there's like 3 in Raleigh owned by a franchise and 3 in Durham. You can't like really move through the system like we can because we own and operate. Right. The Vegas thing like couldn't happen at Jiffy Lube. Really.
Thank you. That's great.
That's so awesome. Maybe
Lady in.
Yeah, we'll take one last question. Yep.
Oh, okay, 2.
Two, we'll take 2, okay, as long as Scott has good stay.
How do you decide that a problem is or isn't worth pursuing versus just not thinking about the problem the right way?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you decide which problem is worth pursuing or not? This is the hardest challenge of both ChannelAdvisor and Spiffy is, so we're at a scale now of, we have 300 vans, 500 technicians, and we're at like a 60 million run rate. So we're doing 5 million a month. So part of the trick is how do you prioritize things? And it is a super target-rich environment. So, you know, we could be working on so much stuff. Like when you really kind of dig into this, it's kind of crazy because we always joke and like, we're just washing cars. How hard could it be, right? But, you know, so the framework I look at is, let's try to quadrantize the opportunities. And, you know, a lot of our ideas are on the consumer side, and we tend to deprioritize those because consumers 15% of what we do. But, you know, so that's one. So there's a B2B angle, a fleet angle, and a consumer angle. So that's the first path. And then the other path is this going to help us hit our revenue goals, or is this an efficiency thing? If it's a customer problem, then, you know, that escalates to the top. Most of the things we're working on are new opportunities, but they're a problem because we can't do that new opportunity because we need a certain, you know, technician, open a city, or, you know, so here's an example. So, you know, right now we would debate, you know, so one of our largest customers wants us to open up in Montana, Billings, Montana. It's hard to say no to your largest customer, so we say maybe, but here's what you have to do, and then they said yes, we will do all that. We're like, oh crap, they said yes. So there's, you know, do we open up in Billings, Montana? We're having a lot of success scaling Amazon, so we want to do more of that. And we have these car dealers that want us to license our software. Should we do that? So that's kind of the set of things we're constantly trying to think through. How do we prioritize those? And it's the most fun of this because no one's built this, right? There's no roadmap for what we're doing, so we have to figure it out. So that's the most fun part, is figuring that out. And that's where I spend the bulk of the management team, we spend the bulk of our time on that question, if I think I'm understanding your question. And the answer is, it's very hard. I don't know the right answer. And that's where it's that gray area I mentioned with Amazon. You kind of have to figure it out with your gut. You have to kind of say, you know, and I like to use an allocation kind of mechanism. So one thing I learned at ChannelAdvisor was 70% of what you do at this scale of a company should just be pounding the more button. You know, so if it's something like, I want to add a customer in San Francisco where we already are, then that should be, yes, that's easy, right? That's like more of what we're already doing. And then we'll do 20% of stuff one layer out. You know, so like this Amazon stuff's one layer out, and then we'll spend 10% of our time effort on these kind of innovative, you know, moonshot type things like that dealership stuff. So the answer is, we're going to do a lot of this stuff, but we're going to use an allocation matrix and think of, you know, that the allocation is typically our engineering resources is where it comes down to. You know, so if we have Spiffy, we have 25 engineers, so you know, 80% of them should be working on the core business and driving that forward, and then the other ones can kind of work on this further out. So that's the framework I've landed on that tends, and I'll dial it up and down sometimes depending on what's going on, but that's a good framework that we use for that. I think there was a question.
You really answered it.
Oh, was there one more question? That wasn't a real question. Good, sir.
This is more of a general question, but what personal qualities do you think make a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, so you haven't mentioned it yet, but I also, part of my giving back to the triangle is, so my first company, I would have failed miserably if I didn't have a mentor named Richard Holcomb. You probably know Richard. Yes, you know Richard well. Done. And so it got to the point where he was giving me so much of his time, I was just like, can I pay you or something? He's like, no, in the triangle we pay it forward. So he said, someday some crazy 20-year-old entrepreneur is gonna come to you and I want you to help them. And I said, okay, Richard. So I've tried to embody that. The first half of that was just encouraging other people to be entrepreneurs. We had kind of a lack of entrepreneurs in the area. And then between ChannelAdvisor and Spiffy, I poked my head up, and we had so many startups that I couldn't even figure out how to help I realized I'm good at helping entrepreneurs that are through product market fit. Like that part of entrepreneurship is like, to mentor someone through that is almost like a full-time job. And I already have a full-time job. So I was like, who could I help scale their business? And I was like, no one's put together a list of the bigger businesses in the triangle. I'll do that. So I called that the Tweener list. I like to make up words. So I borrowed Tweener from how you talk about pre-tweens and used it in talking about companies. Then I started a Tweener fund. So I meet a lot of entrepreneurs, and now I get to decide which ones to invest in. It's somewhat programmatic. The Tweener fund basically says if you have $1 million ARR, you kind of get a check, right? But I do have the fun of meeting all these entrepreneurs, and the one characteristic, having seen a lot of people succeed and fail, is grit. And so then someone asked me, like, I would love to go with you to figure out how you figure out grit. And it's one of those things I can't put. I have to kind of meet someone and spend a fair amount of time with them to understand if they have it. But the people that make it through, entrepreneurship's really hard, especially that product market fit part. And you just have to be like foolishly optimistic and stubborn to the point where you're just like Don Quixote, run into the wall 1,000 times till your forehead's bleeding, and then the 90th time you punch through. And so that is the one thing that I found with entrepreneurs that tends to lead to them being successful. That they're like so passionate and crazed about what they want to do that they make it through there. Now that doesn't guarantee success, So I've met people that had that feature. There was a period of time right after the Social Network movie came out that talks about how Mark Zuckerberg wanted to be girls and he did Facebook and all. And it was like every entrepreneur I met was wanted to build a social network, and they had grit, but they were like, I'm going to take down Facebook. I'm like, that's really, really hard. And but they were like, to their credit, they were persistent, but none of them kind of broke through. So you have to kind of like have grit, but then you have to have an idea that's not just a copy of something that's out there already, and kind of a unique idea that has a customer pain. So you have to have grit and then like really understand a customer pain, and that tends to be the recipe for success.
And just to let you guys know, the Tweener Fund is one of the most active funds in the nation. It's top in the Southeast after just starting this not too long ago. That's amazing. That's, congratulations. That's awesome for everyone here.
Yeah, what I didn't realize is we do, it's a quarterly fund, so we get to do a press release every quarter, and that generates a lot of buzz. And then because we're an index fund, we do lots of small investments. So we're walking up these league tables, and there was an article that came out from Crunchbase, and it was like, the top 2 investors are Andreessen Horowitz and the Triangle Tweener Fund. And I was like, wow, that's called punching above your weight. And it's because we submit our investments to Crunchbase and then also to PitchBook, and we just showed up on these league tables as doing a ton of investments. It's kind of funny. They invested a lot more. We invest $50,000 checks, and they invest,
It's based on the number.
yeah,
right?
$1 million checks. So it's just based on the number of investments, but
That's
hey,
pretty
we'll take
cool.
it. PR is PR, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. One last question.
How will you know when to sell?
How will you know when to sell? So my first company, I was so green, I didn't know what TAM was. Like, I didn't understand that. And I pitched a bunch of VCs, and they would all say, this could never return my fund. I didn't understand what that meant. And what they were trying to tell me in hindsight was, my first company went after what was probably a $20 million addressable market. It wasn't really venture backable. And I realized after we got to 12 million, I started doing the math, and I was like, oh man, we have like 80% market share. Then if we go international, it kind of doubles it, but still I could like see the path to 24 million, and that was it. So we sold right around that 12 million range. So, there's a number of factors. There's kind of like, my job is to drive shareholder return, and I've got a lot of venture investors. So, I need to try to pick the top of that. And the other thing I'll say is, everything I've done, the question I get a lot is like, why do you keep doing this? And I love to challenge myself. It's kind of like mountain climbing, but I don't do mountain climbing. So this company has got the biggest addressable market of anything I've ever tried to chew on. And it's so big, and we're number 1, that I think it would be foolish to sell right now unless it was just a ridiculously, like a number that was 4 years ahead of our current valuation or something like that, which almost makes it unviable because I don't think anyone's gonna do that. Now they may. There's examples of that in e-commerce. Once all the, I call them analog dinosaurs, once all the analog dinosaurs woke up and realized there was a comet like kind of, right in the sky, they were like, oh crap, we need to get some digital DNA. So PetSmart bought Chewy, Walmart bought Jet, Unilever bought Dollar Shave Club. You probably know this better than I do. And they paid exorbitant prices for those because it was an extinction level event for them to not be digital. So maybe that could happen at some point because it's definitely playing out again in this space. I think the most likely scenario for us is we go public, and then after that maybe one of the bigger companies realizes that we would need to be part of it. So we'll see. No plans right now.
Well, I have a Harvard gift for you. I want to thank you so much.
Thanks. This is my first Harvard gift.
With yeah, you can open it if you want. Here you go. Thank you so much for being with us.
Very nice set of glasses.
Yeah,
This is gonna really class up
you're
now.
etched with the logo.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed them.
I'll put it next to my Gamecock and my Wolfpack.
Thank you all for being here. We really enjoyed being with you, Scott.
Thanks, everybody.